How's your cat?
He wants to put in
Don't catch me here.
Yeah. Hello. This isn't the Kristen Crone meeting. This is the River Revitalization Steering Committee.
Haven't seen everyone in a while.
Well, we love having you here. Thank you. I'm going to call tonight's meeting to order. Kaylee, can we please have the roll call?
Yes. Chair Joan Jones.
Here.
Vice Chair Jan Zabriskie.
Here.
Committee members Jan Holland.
Here.
Alicia Barr.
Here.
Travis Kribble.
Here.
Tori Caldwell.
Here.
Jessica Penman.
Here.
Steph Olivieri.
Here.
Brian Wright.
Here.
Jeff Manasco.
Here.
Lisa Wallace.
Here.
Rolf Godon.
Here.
Councilmember Lindsay Romack.
Here.
Richard Palante and Pam Hobday are noted absent.
I think you missed Tim Mover.
I'm here too.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I said you, but maybe.
But he's here. Thank you. I would like to open for public comment for anything not on tonight's agenda. If anyone would like to make a comment, please state your name. You have 3 minutes, and I need you to come to the podium. Seeing none, I will close public comment. And we will move to the consent item. We have the minutes of August 6th, 2024. Would any member like to pull an item? Seeing none, any staff or public? No? Seeing none, I will call for a motion to
So
approve.
moved. I move we approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. Can we have a second?
Second.
Alicia.
I love that the public officers are right there. They've been well trained. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Presentations. Staff, I think, updates. We have no staff updates?
Can I share one quick update? Very
Absolutely.
unofficial, be very quick. I watch a lot of public meetings, and I watched the latest town council meeting, and during council updates at the very end, council member Courtney Henderson shared that she had heard that this committee is of the highest caliber and is super productive and super high functioning, and so I just want to pass that along because I know not everyone watches all to the very end of every town council meeting. So good job and keep up the great work.
Well, thank you for that update.
Someone did a good job seeding the rumor mill.
Keep it up. Great. We'll move into our first discussion item. We have the River Health and Access Action Team Chair, and these are the team considerations and recommendations. And I think Lisa Wallace is going to kick us off here.
Yeah, thanks, Joan. Thanks, everyone. We had planned to have Stephanie, our from Design Workshop, do this presentation this evening. So I can definitely do it, but I haven't done a lot of prep, so excuse any stumbles that I have. So I'm the chair of the River Health and the River Health and Access Action Team, and you can see the other members of the action team here. Me, Jan Holland, who is on our committee, Maggie Cummins, Richard Anderson, Morgan Hargrave, and Jake Hudson are the members from the community who are on the action team. We've met so far from April through September, and this is one important thing I do want to make sure everybody has a minute to understand is we received presentations and public comment from Balance Hydrologics. They were the team. They're a sub-consultant to Design Workshop, and you might remember quite a while ago, we had presentations from them on the get their title correct, from the Baseline Ecological Features and Assessment Report. We at the steering committee received the draft report. At the action team, we received the final report. And we were also able to provide them some feedback on that report. We received an in-depth presentation from Town of Truckee staff on the stormwater program with particular emphasis on East and West River streets. We heard from a group of advocates for the Whitewater Park. You might remember that they came once or twice to this steering committee meeting and they made public comment. They didn't present to the steering committee, but they did make a presentation to the action team. And then we received public comment from Trout Unlimited and from the Truckee River Legacy Foundation. So those were the various inputs into our action team. One of the key things for us on the action team, this guiding principle is in balanced hydrologics, baseline ecological functions report. And we really appreciated that and kind of adopted this as a guiding principle for our action team. It's from the Town of Truckee 2040 General Plan. Preserve and expand the quality, I'm gonna have to read it from here, you guys, sorry. Preserve and expand the quality and quantity of natural systems in Truckee by promoting aquatic and terrestrial biodiversity and by implementing environmental, ecological, and conservation-minded strategies. So that's from the 2040 General Plan. Next slide, please. So we provided a memo, I'm calling it a memo, report's kind of a big word for it, but a memo from the action team to the steering committee. This slide deck is obviously a distillation of that memo. The memo identifies 6 categories of enhancement opportunities. They're listed here. And in the memo, there are overall recommendations for each category and selected site-specific recommendations for each category. Then there are a series of maps that show the locations where these opportunities can actually be considered for implementation. For the presentation, I'm just gonna talk through the general recommendations for each of the 6 categories. I'm not gonna go through the site-specific stuff, and I'm not gonna talk through all 8 of the maps. Of course, if anybody has questions at the end of me going through this, I'm happy to answer them, but I'm not gonna walk us through the maps. So we can go to the next slide, please. So, floodplain restoration and protection. So, you all might remember this. You might remember this from the presentation we had from Balanced Hydrologics. There's a regulatory definition of a floodplain and a geologic or geomorphic definition of a floodplain. And we're talking about both floodplains here. And the reason we emphasize that is that there are places within our project area where there's a regulatory limit for a floodplain, but the geomorphic or geologic floodplain expands beyond the regulatory limit. And so we want both. We pick any definition of floodplain you want to use, we want it all to be considered. So remove fill to expose floodplain soils to promote riparian habitat and hydrologic connectivity. That means so that the river can go the places the river wants to go, where it would naturally go on its original course. Stabilize stream banks using bioengineered approaches. This means not only riprap, right? The bio in there is what's important. There's some biological elements to stabilization, not only built or engineered solutions. Reconnect river hydrology with floodplain functions. There are a couple of places where, more than a couple, there are a few places, for example, where cottonwoods or riparian habitat would thrive and would do better, but they're blocked by some fill or some levees or some old road beds, and that fill, those levees, that road bed could be breached or even removed, reconnecting the main stem of the Truckee into getting water into those areas. So that's what we mean by reconnecting the hydrology. Manage access while protecting riparian resources. You'll see this comes up repeatedly for us. So yes, we want people to have access to the river, but the riparian vegetation zones need to be protected. Enhancements should not negatively affect flows or in-stream biota, in-stream life across all seasons. So yeah, just any enhancements, whether they're development, whether they're recreation, built enhancements of any kind, or so-called restoration enhancements, we should make sure that we're that we're actually protecting what we want to be protecting and not using that as an excuse and cause more harm. I just explained about reconnecting historic channels. Any approaches should reflect the current flood regime with the goal of having a more natural floodplain. So this is a little tricky. The Truckee River, the main stem of the Truckee River is dam controlled. It's controlled at Lake Tahoe, and then Donner Creek, which flows into our study area reach, is also dam controlled. So it can be hard to implement quote unquote restoration projects, you know, back to some point in the future before the dams. And so what we're saying here is that we should recognize the current flow and flood regimes that are coming through on the river. So some of these things I realize are, they're kind of technical or science-based, but very often when enhancements or restoration projects or protection projects are implemented, they're done without considering sufficient knowledge of current conditions or what is possible and what is not possible with the science. You might remember from Balance's presentation, there was quite a bit of emphasis from the consultants about this reach of the Truckee River was formed through different periods of glaciation, and it's a pretty stable reach of river. And so there are some things we can do for restoration. We just listed a bunch of them that could, but there are other things that can't be done. So it's important for us to keep the science in mind and the current conditions in mind. I mean, I'm just gonna keep going.
Yep.
Also, the timekeepers, like if I need to speed it up, you can speed me up. It's a lot to go through, so. Okay, where am I? Corridor wide, right, stormwater management. So, overall, our goal here is to provide more data with the goal of preventing sediment from entering the Truckee River and from entering tributaries, specifically Donner Creek and Trout Creek, because those two, obviously there are many tributaries that feed into the main stem of the Truckee, but again, we're focused on our project area here, so Trout Creek and Donner Creek. Right now, the town is doing consistent I'm gonna summarize all of these, is doing consistent stormwater monitoring in some conditions, but not in all conditions. And what we have a strong recommendation of is that there's increased monitoring under a variety of seasonal conditions, not just dry conditions, not just wet conditions, but across all conditions. And in addition to traditional storm water monitoring, that there's increased monitoring of the macroinvertebrates, the water bugs that actually live on the stream bed in the Truckee River, to help us understand a correlation between the health of the macroinvertebrates and the stormwater flows that are coming in. Macroinvertebrates are what the fish and some birds eat as their food source. So it's kind of a key part of that old idea that we have of the food web. Next slide. Let me just see if I want to. Right. So the second point here again is to use bioengineering and low impact development techniques for stormwater management. So the town right now is doing that where it can, but we would like to see an increased emphasis on mechanisms like bioswales and vegetated infiltration systems, not just only, sometimes you don't have any choice, you have to have those big vaults that go underground that collect and process stormwater, but if we can have more bioengineered solutions, we'd really like an emphasis on that. The last point here is to make sure that we're addressing public and private property for stormwater management. And I'm not sure in our memo if we got this far or not, but we had quite a bit of discussion about the possibilities for private landowners. Could there be some incentives for them to improve stormwater management on their properties? Yeah, I think actually that's in point 3. We did get that far. Yeah. Next slide, please. Stephanie, I'm just gonna keep rolling through these, but if you want to add anything in, please do. I already committed to everybody that I'm not gonna literally walk through the maps. They can ask questions about the maps, but I'm not gonna walk through the maps. Our next area of opportunities and considerations is in vegetation enhancement. We we were surprised, there's a fair number of sites for noxious and invasive weeds, and those need to be treated kind of ASAP, and then we need to keep treating them to keep them down. So as we see more and more of the precipitation shifts from climate change, more shifts to water away from snow, even at the town level, that creates more opportunities for noxious weeds to come in, which competes with the native vegetation. So we are recommending an increased emphasis on treating the weeds. There are a few stands of overstocked forested areas, those should be treated. We should be promoting cottonwood regeneration. We've had discussion a few times here at the steering committee and in our breakout groups about beavers and cottonwoods. There's a limited amount we can do about that, but we want to be promoting regeneration where we can. I'm just gonna pause for a minute and say, Maggie, I'm sorry I didn't see you earlier. One of our action team members is here too. Maggie's here. Likewise, we want to protect existing stands of willow and alder along the river. Our next area for considerations is the wildlife habitat, providing connectivity for wildlife habitat. So by implementing the enhancement and restoration projects that I've talked about, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Is this the only one we had for corridor-wide wildlife habitat connectivity?
Corridor-wide it was.
Yeah.
There were some specific
Okay.
areas that were noted as being
Thanks.
important, especially for the aquatic.
Perfect. So, yeah, we have one consideration that will benefit wildlife. If we're implementing the enhancement and restoration projects in the riparian and floodplain that I've been talking about, that will in turn benefit wildlife and promote wildlife connectivity. We got some very basic mapping from the consultant team on wildlife connectivity areas. And it won't surprise everybody here that on the south side of the Truckee River, there are more areas that are critical for wildlife to move through and connect. As we get to the north side of the river, those areas become really sparse. So it's important to have, even on the south side, it was surprisingly limited, south side of the river. It's important to maintain what's on the south side and really critical to maintain what's on the north side. And that's what's going to allow, the bear, the coyotes to move through, but also it allows birds, right? It allows all of our wildlife at all, anywhere, whether they're on the ground or in the air, allows them to move through our community. Next slide, yeah, great. So river access. A key point for us here is that river access points should be professionally designed and at a minimum include a hydrologist. We also would recommend that, so a hydrologist, somebody who understands the flow of the river, and there could be access points where an access point is put in and it will remain very stable. The river, as the river rises in the spring and lowers through the rest of the year, in given areas, it will not impact the stability of that recreation access point. But there could be other places where access points are put in, and when the flows are high, they'll rip out or erode the access point. And a hydrologist helps us figure that out. We would also recommend that there's a botanist that's involved in designing the access points. One, to just help identify where riparian vegetation is healthy and is really healthy and really critical and we don't want to disturb it. But also for where we've put in an access point, what can we do to adjacent to the access point to protect the riparian vegetation. We should get some definitions for park, open space, and managed access. We took a stab at some of these definitions, and this is maybe especially pertinent when you look at the maps. Park, for us, we took to mean is an open space area with enhanced riparian vegetation and possible access. Open space would include riparian areas and upland areas and would, I don't wanna say there would be no access in open space, but less access in open space. You know, it would be open space, not recreation space. And then managed access would be a constructed trail, or for example, those of you who've been able to get out to the Truckee Springs property, you might have seen that there are some spur trails off of the Legacy Trail down to the Truckee River. Those are, they're marked, they're clearly marked. They're very, so you know where you should be and where you shouldn't be. And when we're providing access to the river, we think it should be managed access. And those are, the Truckee Springs property access points are pretty low key. That's appropriate for that environment. On the north side, access might need to be a little bit more robust. It might involve stairs. It might involve, rail ties with some DG. It might be a little bit more robust access because it's steeper, generally speaking, on the north side of the river. Number 3, reduce access or dissuade use where there's high risk, we should have said, of sedimentation and high risk of degradation of riparian vegetation and habitat. So for example, where there are cottonwoods, where there's alders, where there's willows, right? We want to, those are high priority vegetation sets. We want to protect those, and we would want to minimize recreation access at those points. And generally speaking, we prefer access where people are already using. That's a generalization. There are some places where people are accessing the river now that will harm cottonwoods. So we would prioritize the cottonwoods over the access. But there are other places, for example, Truckee Springs that I just mentioned, where people are accessing the river, and so we should continue to promote that. Oh, I'm done. So I went through all those very quickly, and as I mentioned, there are 6 maps to go through, so I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm happy to talk about anything on the maps, or Stephanie can also help me in answering questions and discussing the maps.
And then we actually have David Shaw as well. for
Yeah,
balancing.
and Maggie Hargrave is here too. Yeah.
Are these maps gonna be available online so people can peruse them at a more readable scale at their leisure if they have questions?
Yes, and they were part of the packet.
Right, but I'm just saying, for those who are tuning in afterwards and wanna take a look at these, they'll be able to look at those.
Yeah. I can put them on the webpage, just
Perfect.
kindly draft.
Lisa, I had a question. Quite often we do lots of planning in Truckee and we make guidelines and so forth, but there's limited monitoring. There's limited supervision of the things that we are most concerned about. How do you see this actually being enforced or being done when, will we need additional budgeting through the town? And someone who's agreed to be monitoring this, some agency?
Right. Okay, so I will say the action team has not talked about that yet, so being fair as the chair of the action team. But there's two or 3 point stuff I want to make in answer to your question. So some of the things we talk about here at a kind of a minimum accept level would be caught through the CEQA process, through a regulatory of an environmental compliance and a permitting process. But many of the things we're talking about are above and beyond a standard regulatory compliance process. So figuring out how to monitor to see if we're hitting those standards is a good question. My second point is that question is probably going to apply to quite a lot of what our whole steering committee is going to do. So, making recommendations and setting standards or setting decision criteria. And so if those are all adopted by the town council, yeah, I think it's an open question. And I can't really speak to the cost of that whatsoever.
Well, I think that once we have plans together, it's gonna be easier to put cost to it. And then we do need to find who's going to be responsible for monitoring it. I think we've got a good example with the Legacy Trail going to the east, where we have no monitoring that I can see of paths being cut constantly, new paths, trash, litter. There doesn't seem to be anything planned for controlling all of that, and opening up new access points concerns me unless we do put a plan in place. And that plan probably should include the existing Legacy Trail access to the river.
Yeah, so that's another good point. Our action team has also not talked about maintenance, so, yeah. So I'll take that as an action item to come back to that one I feel comfortable taking back to the action team. And maybe an additional, for us to consider, an additional statement about the implementation criteria. You know, I'll find a better way to say it, but how do we make sure that, again, if these considerations are adopted by the town council, that the standards are being hit?
Yep.
Yeah.
I just have some clarifying questions. On the mapping, are you talking about just mapping the physical substrate and elevation, or would you also be mapping habitats in terms of the species, like you mentioned the giant water bug?
I could hear most of your question. Were we talking about mapping substrate?
Would the mapping be limited to the physical substrate and elevation, or would it also include some kind of biological mapping, whether it's aquatic plants or habitats for something like the giant water bug? So physical versus also biological.
Yeah, again, we didn't super specifically talk about that, but the context of our conversations was physical and biological.
Okay, and then on the invasive weeds, is that where we distinguish between weedy invasives and non-weedy invasives, or are we just talking about natives and non-natives?
Yeah. I think, again, I can take that action item if I should. We didn't get that far. I think we were looking more from the point of view. I'm also gonna, at some point, you can help me figure this out, invite other of my action team members if they wanna add in, or Stephanie if Stephanie wants to add in. The context really was some data from Balance Hydrologics report. They did not do comprehensive surveys. So in the limited surveys that they did, they found these sets of invasives and noxious weeds. So that's one thing, some is identified already. The second thing is the context for us was really about the promotion of native vegetation, more than eliminate these, eliminating them promotes natives.
Okay.
But we can refine that if we should.
Yeah. Because it's in the eye of the beholder, what's a weed and what's not a weed.
Yes.
I guess. And then on the.
I'll take the action item for us to clarify that we mean the there's specific definition, as you of all people know, but.
And then on the access points, so did the action team discuss river bank or stream bank trails and decide against them? And just say, we just want to do access points on the north side of the river and along Donner Creek versus actually having trails running along the river and creek?
I just need to think a minute about this. Sorry, I just need to think for a minute. We are not opposed to trails. We had no discussion about being opposed to trails. I think the context for us was that there are a lot of things being considered for the north side of West River Street and the north side of East River Street. Many, many things beyond just recreation access or walking access. So we're not opposed to trails, and we did identify some trails that could be put in to enhance connectivity, people connectivity and transportation connectivity. But and as you go through some of these maps, you'll see where some trails are offered for consideration. Yeah, Jan?
Because I can see that as being a thorny.
Yeah, which is why we didn't get too deep into it, I have to say.
I would love to add that, I mean, to Jan's point, this action team had a pretty broad scope, and, you know, maybe it was been 4 meetings, many of which were tied up with presentations from consultants or from the general public. You know, it's the River Health and Access Action Team, and we actually had a really great representation of people highly focused on river health, including myself. I had to be the one in the room that was often saying, yes, and we are the river health and access, because we want to see how people integrate into this environment. You know, we didn't spend a ton of time on the trails. We did look at specifically where, I mean, one of the foundational, or one of the big picture themes was, hey, we do have this great legacy trail on the south side. We have a lot of open space on the south side. We are concerned that we need to manage access points, because we've just created a really great way for people to access the river, but we haven't really managed any of that access or protected sensitive riparian zones. So that's an important point. On the north side of the river, it's almost all private property, and so we carefully identified some locations that were private property that might be a good opportunity for creating river access, but more importantly, creating a connection to the open space and the trail connectivity on the south side. So I don't know if that clarifies.
Yeah, so I think in summary, we're not opposed to trails. We did not get into too deeply into recommending trail alignments.
Yeah. Speaking as a council member, I think it would be really important to the council to know what this group is recommending, because even though the property is private, as virtually all private property owners know, the town will often take a pound of flesh for any development, and it could be in the form of mitigation for environmental damage or what have you, however we phrase it. It could be in the form of trails, or it could be in the form of something else. And
So-
if this committee were to say, we just think you need access points, that could influence
Yeah, Stephanie, am
the approach
I
the town takes.
fair in saying this, that there's gonna be a step in the future where the work of this action team and the work of other action teams and the steering committee get integrated, and what Councilmember Jan Zabriskie is asking for could be reflected with regard to trails in that whole context?
Yes, I think that is fair. The work of this team would go back to the River Health and Access Action Team. They would get to look at it from their lens and weigh in on, does this align with the goals and the objectives that you've identified in the recommendations? So if that's something that you would like them to weigh in on specifically as that connection comes through, we can look at that.
At the risk of getting into the weeds, I would just like to be very cautious with that concept of pound of flesh. I think that is the reason the river is undeveloped and dilapidated at this point, is because nobody can make progress, and if we're advertising up front, we're gonna take a pound of flesh, nothing's gonna happen. So I think that raises a lot of hackles, I think, around the private community. We wanna do what's right, but if you come at it from that angle, I just think those are dangerous terms.
Yeah, I said that in part to provoke
It works.
a response, but also recognize reality.
I appreciate
Everybody,
that.
developer knows there's
I
many.
mean, the people know that have the property, what Jan is saying, the pound of flesh, they know all too well. So I'm glad he said it, because that does raise hackles, but then that's reality.
I guess I would ask a question, how much access should we have on the river?
Thank you.
And how does what we have compare with what we think we should have?
Yeah, Can you go back to the first slide? So, this is a guiding principle for us. Preserve and expand the quality and quantity of natural systems in Truckee by promoting aquatic and terrestrial biodiversity and by implementing environmental, ecological, and conservation-minded strategies. So there's no, it's like people used to try to define carrying capacity of an environment. Like it's a lose-lose question. So how much access we want, that's a social question, not only an environmental question.
Great.
I think what we could do, we could call it out a little more explicitly. What are some more explicit criteria to consider when we're talking about access? I think our action team could do that and provide that as a tool. But we can't define outside the context of what overall the steering committee is trying to do. We can't define what is a right amount of access. But if we want to do this, which is in our general plan, which we've adopted, then it's going to be a very thoughtful process for every time we create a new access point. And it's going to, and if we're going to do this and we're going to increase access, it's going to include hydrologists, botanists, landscape architects,
And the
to help
maps,
us do it right.
they do indicate a number which oddly enough are really similar to where the Economic Vitality Action Team recommended, so it's not that far off. And the goals are very similar, but the three maps do indicate.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing anything, I really
Yeah.
like the report.
Yeah.
It's just, it's an issue, and since you're doing river health, that means you also have the expertise in terms of what's the impact of a trail on river health, animal habitats, plant habitats.
Yep. Yep.
We have plenty of examples of it. Again, I go back to the legacy trail that we already have in existence and the damage that's being caused by access, unlimited access. And my concern is how do we deal with that as a community, and how does the study deal with it? Because I really haven't seen anything that deals with existing impacts that we know will come with the new trail, and we know will only get worse with the other. I mean, these are consequences we probably didn't really think about, and I'm very concerned about them, and I think this is a good time to look into that and see as a community how we can address it and limit it.
I would just add, I think that's very important for this section, and appreciate, this group's look at access. And maybe this can help us take ideas to translate into other parts of the Legacy Trail. But I don't think this group should get into sections outside of what we're talking about, just because then we could go down a whole bunch of rabbit holes. But I think, I agree with you, we need to look at, but I feel like this committee, we should concentrate on these sections of the river.
We'll learn from them.
Exactly.
That's what I'm hoping the study will tell us, what works and what doesn't work. And we can apply that to existing
Yep.
areas and future areas.
With the development, and this, just as an idea, the development of more clear or recommendation for indicators and thresholds as part of access, to pick up Lisa's point, there is, in your point, there is access occurring right now, but I think there's been, from my conversations and listening to the group, sort of this respect for the cottonwoods and some of the vegetation, that those are the priority areas. Let's protect those when we're thinking about access, not there, but maybe here. So there's already a little bit of some assessments of where things are appropriate, that, if you see, X number of trails or X number of erosion, it goes to the monitoring piece of, we need to close an area off. And so there's some decision-making pieces that give the land managers some tools. I'm sure you've already been developing those or have those as well. But that could be something that the action team
I'm
Adds
just,
to the
yes, and
recommendations.
I'm just suggesting that we have an example existing already. It's outside of our area, but it's a perfect example that we can learn from. And I'm hoping that that your committee is going to look into that.
Yeah, Stephanie and Chair Wallace, I'd like to piggyback on Stephanie's suggestion here, and I think our action team should really look very closely at this idea of managed access. I think that in the conversations we had, and you know, I think I was a very balanced member on that committee, but I'm also very concerned that we're creating, already have created a lot of unmanaged access, which is only going to make the riparian area worse, and we're already seeing examples of that with the newly opened part of the trail. So I think it's worth looking at, you know, our study area and specifically calling out areas where we feel like, you know, maybe we need more professional help with this, but that we find areas where we want to manage access. I think in general, what we were looking at as a committee is that what overall we'd like to see actually less access, and we'd like to manage and improve the access points. In most cases, that were already being used, and in a lot of cases, creating erosion and sedimentation into the river. So, you know, I think your point is very well. I mean, I think receptive within the committee. I don't think we've gotten to the point where we're actually been that specific.
Well, and something that came up very early in our discussions was the concept of access versus engagement. So like, do we really need to be touching the water? Or in the downtown core, like the park is a perfect engagement. People, not everybody necessarily needs to be in the river, but just feel like they're right there. They can hear it, they can smell it, all that. And so I think that as part of this plan could mitigate a lot of that, feeling engaged without actually going all the way down.
Any more committee questions for the team? Because I'd like to open it to the members of your committee that are here, if they would like to make any other comments.
So Maggie's here, Richard's here.
Gosh. No, I don't have anything to add on top of what Lisa said. This has been a very engaging and great learning experience to really look at what we have and the great thing that we have and how we can protect it for future generations. Obviously the issue of access is very sticky, and I think having managed access at concentrated points will help kind of lead people to areas that will be cause less degradation than other areas. And on these maps, we do have relatively few managed access points for a reason. Kind of like what Jan said about private property along the north side of the river, but also intentionally to create more controlled access. And also, I just would like to reiterate that all of these 6 things that Lisa went through, these 6 categories that we've decided, they work as an ecosystem. You affect one thing, you affect another thing. So that's also a very good thing to remember within these recommendations. That's it for me. Thank you.
Well, I'll just note, and apologies for coming in late.
It's great you're here.
With regard to access on the south side, again, the north side is primarily private property and so has trespass issues, but the south side is largely public property. But access is actually quite a bit limited from riparian vegetation, from the stands of alder and willow, especially, for example, in the Truckee Springs parcel. And one way to manage access is kind of a twofer in the sense of you get reduced impact, but also enhanced riparian vegetation is by planting more willows, planting more alder along the riverbanks on the south side. I mean, just a thought that popped up right now during the conversation is that if you want to manage access, let's do it naturally with riparian vegetation, riparian shrubbery and trees. So it's an opportunity to achieve the habitat goals of the general plan, but also minimize additional damage that will likely result, that will result as this part of the Truckee downtown area becomes more attractive for visitors and for river use.
Maybe I'm not sure if Dave would like to say something, the
Oh, Dave.
consultant.
Yeah?
Sure, well, along those lines, you know, we're talking about examples of where there's too much access or how to deal with that. There's also an example upstream of town and upstream of Alpine Meadows between Tahoe City and Alpine Meadows where there was a lot of work done because there was too much access, too many people, and banks were getting trampled. So there was work done to use some of the principles that Richard's talking about to restore the floodplain and make it, and basically guide people in really focused areas, and make the floodplain, you know, inaccessible because of planting, riparian vegetation, and putting in trees and root wads and things like that. So those kind of things can be done, and people can be guided in that way. So I was just thinking about that if we're looking for examples.
Thank you. Great. Now I'd like to open for public comment.
Thank you.
Please do. Thank you, Joe.
I have a question on the presentations. Are those published from the presentations from the hydrologist, from the whitewater rafting proposal? Are those published? Can we see what they're?
They're on the website. They can be a little hard to find. I'm still working to edit the website to make it more user friendly. I can send you directly just because you're asking, but I will be updating the website to make it so that anyone should be able to find them more easily.
Okay, thank you. And along those lines, like the whitewater part, why would that be part of the river health and access? But Lisa, you had mentioned environmental biodiversity. Why would that fall into your action committee?
I have one answer, but then also anybody else can help me out here. The action team meetings are public meetings, and they asked to make a presentation to us,
Okay.
so we said yes.
Okay.
That's my answer. I don't.
I think that's the answer.
Thank you.
Yep.
So in all of this, I've seen, so clearly some places, no access and no trails is the most environmental approach there is, right? Zero. And so cutting the sword of, well, we'll make it there, and then we've got to counterbalance the devastation that we just allowed for everyone to be going through this access point, and then we'll rebuild something else to counterbalance it. Seems like a complete waste of time to me. Is that just leave it alone? So that's one. Especially on the private property that is not inviting public access to be trampled and devastated, to then have to be repaired and re-biodiversified and back and forth. So zero is an option, and you ought to pick some spots and say there is none. And then we can all rest a little bit easier and know that my property is not a chopping block to be cut into trails and everything. Next thing, I didn't see anything about dogs. You see all these places going off the Legacy Trail and everything, half of that's dogs that people are not managing and not handling. And as soon as they're on a leash for a long while, and then the dogs get to go crazy, they chase wildlife, they tear up everything, and nobody cares. They leave their dog bags there, we'll get it on the way back out. And I see them there for days. Nobody, it's not mine, somebody else dropped it there, they're gonna get it on the way back out, but they don't. So you might consider no dogs for access. The biggest damage and running around and seeking out wildlife and tearing up nests and doing this is automatic through dogs, because dog owners do not, by and large, maybe 50% keep them on leash. 50%. All the rest, nobody's watching, there they go. And they're tearing off through every little corner and every little place and seeking out the things you're trying to protect. Seeking out living, smelling things, and they're tearing them up. So I didn't hear anything about dog management and dog control, and maybe how about this whole trail has no dogs. I think that's a really hard thing, because everyone, you're Satan himself if you don't like dogs. It's not that I don't like dogs, I don't like the way that dog owners manage them. That really drives me crazy. After they've jumped on you and slobbered all over you, they come back. Afterwards, they start getting a hold of them. After they've run around and torn up a nest of the geese, then they say, come back, oh, good dog, you came back after it's torn up. So it's always an after the fact, and it always still occurs. So the only way to really do it is to make it, that area, no dogs allowed. So maybe that needs to be added to your thoughts and plans of having people's access.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment on this, and I think we are gonna move into the community and economic vitality action team update. And I don't know if Laura Saylor.
Yeah, Jones, what I'd like to do is have a little bit of a program set up. So first, Pam.
Or you can sit at the table.
Yeah.
If there's room.
Yeah.
Pam
Y'all
can't
have
be.
to come, yeah.
Pam can't be here today, but she wanted me to let everyone know she really wanted to be here for the R2SC and particularly for the discussion we're going to have with the recommendations. So she's really excited about this. Laura's the vice chair of the Economic Vitality Action Committee and actually chaired the meeting last week. So we're going to do a land acknowledgement. Stephanie's going to cover some of the barriers to development that we have gotten from interviews with the landowners. We're going to talk about a recommendation. I'm excited. The entire action team is really excited that I think this is a really big step of engaging the community and doing something that's truly actionable, as opposed to a lot of discussions about plans. This is something where we can really move forward. And then lastly, we're going to cover some investments that the town has already made. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Laura for the land acknowledgement.
I begin today by acknowledging the Washoe people, indigenous custodians of the occupied land known as Truckee that we meet on today. Truckee and the surrounding area of Tahoe Aga is the ancestral and spiritual home to the Washoe, who have stewarded these lands for thousands of years and since the beginning of time. Our town, Truckee, and the surrounding area have been ancestral, trade, and meeting grounds for the Washoe, Martis, Maidu, Miwok, Paiute, Shoshone, and other indigenous peoples for many centuries before us. We recognize the descendants of these tribes and others who continue to share, steward, live, and work on this land with us. The Washoe have always been a part of the land and environment and believe that land, language, and people are intrinsically intertwined. The Washoe have safeguarded these lands since the beginning of time. The earth, its terrain, its waters, all living and non-living things are sacred, and they request that you assist in preserving this ecosystem for future generations. We pay respect to the Washoe elders, past and present and emerging, and we extend that respect to all indigenous Native American peoples here today.
We thought that was important. The discussions we have about revitalizing the river, part of this community has been a powerful force well before we all got here, and we just thought it was really important to talk about that natural force that's been so important to this region well before any of us got here. So with that said, I will hand it over to Stephanie to talk about, and we've heard some of these before. Aaron did not be here tonight, the consultant, but we wanted to kind of just re-highlight some of the barriers to revitalization from the engagement with the business and landowners.
But I think we heard some tonight as well.
We did.
The reiteration of, again, Aaron presented these at the last meeting. They've been in discussion with the Community and Economic Action Team. But out of the interviews that he's had, a number of different barriers have continue to come up and are themes in those conversations. As you can see here, the existing legacy uses that there's the owner's reliance on the income that's being received for these sites. There's added cost and risk associated with redevelopment. A little bit unknown. We're working on it with the receiver sites, but as working with property owners, just that question of wanting to do best by the people who are leasing their spaces and wanting to understand how those receiver sites would work. So a little bit of wanting to understand the process for that, along with new construction, the cost of new construction, and balancing that with market demand and this concentration of demand. The next bullet, sometimes that can feel like it's split between the different priority areas. The new development going on with the rail yards, is there enough market concentration to be able to support the types of uses that would be needed to actually have a return on investment for new construction costs. And then some challenges with some of the zoning alignment. Next slide. Also, with that piece of return on investment, the limited buildable area, based on some of the code restrictions, in particular the floodplain setbacks have come up, which reduces the acreage of land, so reduces the ability to recoup costs. Legal non-conforming regulations, which we talked about before, that limits reinvestment and contributes to blight. It is a tool, though, to be able to, have change over time, but there is a balance there in terms of are you willing to take the time that it takes to be able to see the lack of reinvestment and then make change at that point in time. Changes of parcel boundaries, that came up as a challenge in terms of being able to want to realign some parcel boundaries, but requiring a master plan to do that. Questions about environmental review and remediation in some areas, which is just that, the risk piece of just the unknown, which can lead to not making change. Perceived land use incompatibility between uses of, new uses come in, but we want to keep some of the legacy uses with storage or outdoor storage and other elements like that. Are those compatible or are they incompatible? And then the need for some of the properties to maintain traffic visibility for their existing users in terms of being able to get on and off West River Street. So there are a suite of incentives on the next slide that Aaron had put together, different categories. He has a more robust summary that will come along with these in terms of how easy some are and what would be most applicable. But incentives range from regulatory relief. In terms of being able to have some kind of incentives, development standards, increased height is one of those that you see often in redevelopment areas. Provide us a trail, and we might be able to provide you, a different incentive on your property. So a little bit of a carrot there. Streamlining permitting is an incentive that is seen. If you do X, Y, Z, that you can be able to skip a few steps ahead, have a little bit less risk as part of your project. And then there's direct financial incentives, whether it's direct financial incentive assistance, that the town is assisting with public improvements, taking on undergrounding of power lines, taking on some of the traffic elements. There's planning grants or what we might talk about a little bit as a recommendation. Planning grants that could take the form of either planning for property owners or grants for reinvestment and facade improvements for property owners, and then also potential investment assistance with environmental remediation. And then a suite of different funding sources would need to be discussed and thought about in terms of being able to achieve both the financial incentives and then some of the other incentives as well.
So the recommendation, I'll give kind of a high-level overview, and then Laura will cover some of the conversation that we had last week. From a high level, we've done engagement with the community. We talked about it a lot in the first 6 months of this R2SC. I think we have a great idea of how the community envisions the corridor. We've talked with business and landowners to, what are those barriers? We've had feedback. And so we're kind of at this crossroads of, we kind of know what everyone thinks. And so the next really hard question is, we get really intricate and knock down every single one of those obstacles. Probably not realistic, won't be here for many years. Or we take a very entrepreneurial aspect to this, and we do an RFI to the landowners, a very generic request for information and identify, we go through a selection process. We have a framework for selection before we do the RFI. But to put out the request for information or request for proposal from landowners to engage with the R2SC to create a pilot project to work on some of these obstacles. So instead of knocking down all the obstacles at once, with willing landowners that have some entrepreneurial spirits and have some alignment with the goals and objectives of the general plan, the river strategy from 2005, the things that we have talked about, the R2SC, that we can focus on some obstacles to create that catalyst, maybe for some other landowners, or to find some pathways, whether it's through zoning or planning, or working with various agencies and granting institutions, to literally be a catalyst to begin change. That's the big idea. Laura, you ran the meeting. What am I missing?
I don't think that the intent of the RFI is to serve as a mechanism to identify those interested parties and put a lot of that energy and effort in their hands. We want to look for willing property owners and businesses along the river corridor who want to indicate their interest in partnering to reimagine or restore future uses on their properties, and ultimately with the hope of revitalizing both business and economic vitality and public enjoyment along the way. As part of that RFI, we expect that we would go through a drafting process and review that to understand what kind of makes sense, such that it meets the opportunity to explain to folks what we're looking for, but also is kind of lightweight and tactical enough that it doesn't kind of get in the way of other things that folks are busy really focusing on the important stuff in their day-to-day. As part of that RFI, we expect to provide an overview, summarize some of the work that's already been done in town and the investments that we've already made, as well as a lightweight application and an overview of how we're going to select and identify those. So we want to share that with folks up front as they're indicating their interest in this opportunity. And then as a group, we'll leverage that selection framework and hopefully be in a great position where we have a good problem to solve, where more folks have put up their hand indicating interest than we might be able to support. So we'll identify a small group of manageable and be really focused with somewhere between 1 and 3 small projects to serve as catalysts to begin. And we want to identify those interests and opportunities and have that led by the folks that own those properties and have those businesses and understand what's most important to them, because that's really critical. And ultimately, we want to be able to leverage this as a way to encourage these projects to be a catalyst and serve as an example of this ongoing and really important heart of Truckee. It's this entrepreneurial spirit, and it's the hope here is to really stoke and encourage that by doing so.
That's a big idea.
Yeah, I'll build off of that. We've heard a lot in this meeting about the need to engage with property owners, and this is an idea that has come forth, which really allows us to engage with property owners in a different way. So instead of us drawing on properties, it's drawing in coordination with the property owner to understand what their vision is, have representative voice from the committee, get married up with information from the town to see how those catalyst projects might take shape, and then bringing things back to the
Could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I am not too sure where we are in setting zoning we've said we think we'd like to do, basically, some form of policy for what can be built where, when we have our development code, but also, have we talked about how we are going to lay the project area out with our zoning, which defines by our notes here.
Well, our next agenda item, Steph.
Right.
Is to talk about allowed uses.
Yes.
Throughout the whole corridor.
Right. So, I don't want to get the cart before the horse, which I kind of feel like it is, but I want to say, maybe bring a historic perspective to what you're proposing here. Having been around here for 150 years, I'd like to say I've seen a lot. And growing up in Truckee with a family that owned a store in downtown Truckee, when I was growing up, Truckee was in pretty bad shape. And it took a lot to encourage people to invest. And actually what we did was we found people, we found entrepreneurs who were willing to take a stab at buying buildings, upgrading them, bringing in a new business. And they became examples for what could happen in this town that was kind of falling apart in many ways. And that, by example, which is what you're proposing here, so much happened. It mushroomed. It kind of the domino effect took account for people buying a building because they saw what happened up the street, and they wanted to get in on the ground floor. They saw something possible here, and historically, this is how Truckee progressed and became essentially where we are today. So I am very much in favor of what you're proposing. I think it will give the incentive to investors and property owners, hopefully, to see potential.
Other questions?
Maybe just to add a little bit of flavor from things I heard at the conversation with the action team. There was a lot of concern about forming an action plan that then would sit on the shelf for 20 years and be revisited and really not see the action. So wanting to be cautious of that and reminded of all the conversations that this committee has had. You know, Travis, you've been great at reminding us pretty consistently that we're talking about private property. We have private property, in a lot of cases, not all cases. We have private property owners joining at various stages in this conversation. You know, we've been meeting since over a year now, but we want to continue that engagement. We're hearing there's a variety of different interests for property owners in terms of incentives that would help support efforts if they would like to do something with their property. It's going to vary by individual property owners. And so it's a catalyst to see something move forward and learn from that. Maybe other property owners that are more skeptical about moving forward, we can learn from that. They can see progress and then they can partner in the future. But that was kind of what I heard as the discussion from the committee members in forming this recommendation. And I think they were struggling with the next phase on our timeline was community outreach again. We weren't really sure what that community outreach would look like because we don't really have new questions. We have the same trails, bikes, walking, restaurants, mixed use. That's what we heard in the beginning, and that's still what all of you have talked about consistently. We just haven't moved into individual property sites. We can't spot zone things. We need to be careful of that. But if we have some catalyst sites, and we're going to go through the list in the next item here on allowed uses, that will help inform that.
Well, I think that's so important because you can't encourage someone to do something if it doesn't fit with the zoning being proposed or the concept being proposed. So I think they kind of dovetail. It's going to be important for us to move forward with that.
And I have a couple just process questions. So next step type thing. So what I heard, and you can correct me please, is what I'm trying to get some clarity, is that there would be an RFI put together.
Correct.
And that would come back to this group.
Correct.
For a review. That would then go out to the public, the
Correct.
property owners. there would be an application process that would come back.
A very
to-
simple application process that was talked about, like,
Yeah.
very simple.
Okay.
Not
Which
a
is
big
fine.
lift for the property owners.
Okay, that's fine. Then there would be a selection process.
Correct.
The next step I'm a little confused with, is that to create a plan for the property or and then that gets approved? Or is there, how do we get to the project level? And then there's the incentive piece as well, which I think figuring those out is all part of the process, and part of the why we want to do a pilot. Like, I'm fine that there's some gray fuzzy areas that we don't know yet, but I think there needs to be some check-ins along the way, and also some discovery period where we're asking more questions, like, so what kind of project are you interested in? Like, maybe it's a revitalization, maybe it's, a full new build, but there could be a huge variety in that project part, as well as in what incentives work for the property owner. Like, what works for you? Instead of us telling the property owner what we think might work, I'd love to hear from the property owners what incentives they would be looking for, so we would have like a big menu at some point in time.
Correct.
Of options to then to flesh out this whole plan.
I think your last point is exactly what we're trying to get to. We have macro level. We have some groupings that are quite logical. I think by doing the RFI and having an in-depth conversation, and I think the selection, not only is the RFI, this is what the RFI would look like, at the same time there would be some type of framework for how property owners would be selected. So it's just not who you know, et cetera.
Yeah.
To discern, I think we would rely on Erin, our economic consultant, to kind of, within that framework, pick some of the obstacles that we've heard over and over and over, and maybe some of those obstacles that are maybe a little bit more movable than others. I think that would drive the framework and the selection, and then the conversation for the steps for what is it that the town or the county named the jurisdiction. I don't know that yet, but I think that that's in that period of discovery, and I don't know that anyone here, including the town council, is willing to commit to any of that yet. But I think it's better to do a period of discovery and reaching out to the land owners, literally for that entrepreneurial spirit to go through this period of discovery. I'm reminded of, it's a military quote from Patton. A good plan executed today is better than a perfect plan next week. This is in that.
Yeah.
This is a beta. It's good enough to move forward. We will continue. And even what we just talked about, it's probably a 90-day process before an RFI would even go out to the streets. I think that might even be fast.
Just to follow up, I do want to acknowledge Jason is also on our committee. He's in the back there.
Okay.
So Jason, feel free to, we're missing something. But when we were talking about this and staff was doing this recommendation, we do need to circle back to council and left that out, because this would be a pivot. So I think we've teed up that if this is the direction you're going, or feeling like we can get that on Tuesday's council meeting, which is a pretty fast turnaround. But we need to check in with them. I do want to clarify, the recommendation is 3 sites. And I think what the committee was thinking was 3 kind of different sites. A smaller site, maybe more of a revitalization, maybe more of somebody that's interested in some relocation, that we could focus on a receiver site and what would work for them to kind of work through all those little different details to form that cafeteria.
So again, I know it's the next thing on our list. It's sort of coming after what we should know more about the next item on our agenda. But I caution us to be certain that we're encouraging, when we decide that we may pick 3 things, that it all fits together again. We don't want to do something that's going to limit future growth in areas that we're trying to revitalize. And we do need to start talking about relocation more seriously. We've talk to Cyril Mancuso, who was very helpful in his presentation with our committee. I think it gave us a whole lot of new insights and understanding of his knowledge of industrial development.
The receiver sites.
The receiver sites. And so I think that's a very important key to these meetings with property owners. We need to give them, if they wish to relocate, an option.
Steph, just to make sure I'm clear, because maybe where we're kind of crossing, the RFI would be, what we heard from the committee is really high level, like I am interested in being a catalyst site.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, that's it. I'd like to be considered a little bit more. But if that's a 90-day process, this committee is going to be working through uses during the time that that's out.
Okay. I think that question's going to come up from anyone that you're asking for an
Well,
RFI from.
I think you're right. I also think hearing from the property owner, like if this committee says I only want housing on this site, and the property owner says absolutely not, you're going to want to know that and have that conversation. Probably, you might not change your mind.
Yeah.
But
No,
you
I
want to
think-
hear that feedback.
Yeah, I think it's great feedback, and we have to have it. It's time we stepped into this. So I'm very supportive. I just want to make sure we don't get the chicken before the egg.
Coming back to Steph's point, we briefly discussed the traditional zoning standards of uses and densities, intensities, building heights, setbacks, and I think our action team realized we don't have enough experience or information to start dictating changes in what the general plan our new general plan provides, and our zoning rules provide now, which we're not ready to make changes, and we're more likely to see progress on redevelopment if we learn more about it, and also hear from the property owners and business owners.
Absolutely.
On what they think is feasible for them. So you're exactly right, that's a big issue. It reminds me of just our trail discussion. I realize if we don't make a decision on whether we're gonna recommend a riverbank trail, we could be talking to a property owner and he's ready to mitigate, give us an easement for trails for money or whatever. We could put a trail in one place on his property and then discover the next property should have the trail go somewhere else, so
Exactly.
they don't even connect.
Exactly.
So
Lisa?
it's complicated.
I also really like the idea, and I also am still confused about the end point for this RFI, so I don't think it needs to be super clarified right now, but it really needs to be clarified. You know, a few years ago, we've been through a similar version on a parcel on West River Street, and it hasn't come out great. So, like, of course, we don't want to repeat that. And then I'm guessing from the discussion we've had so far, that there potentially would be something akin to a phase 2, right? There's some discussion with the property owner, we get to whatever the end point is gonna be for this RFI, and then there's some sort of go, no-go point, something. And if we could try, even if it's a very qualitative description, if we could try to define that step too, or some initial thoughts about that step.
I think I'd like to follow up on that, and that, I think that this is an exciting idea, and I think you're probably gonna get some proposals from several property owners, including our group. However, this has a long tail, right?
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, I've learned that the hard way. And I think what's most important is that we identify some policy decisions, some things that we can do to be generally supportive of a bunch of different projects, right? So I think that diving deep into a handful of projects will hopefully identify those, and I think you probably are saying that, but it hasn't been clear, that what we want to do is we want to identify policies and incentives that can help not only that property owner, but others.
But basically remove
yes.
barriers for
Yes.
good projects to come
'Cause
forward.
there was a back and forth of like, well, we start with zoning, do we do this? And it's so overwhelming to not know what moves the needle. And this is where the conversation went, is to engage business and landowners, very specifically with RFIs, what are your ideas? And we talked too, do we pick a housing opportunity? We pick a river access opportunity? We pick a receiver site opportunity? I think there's some more discussion, and I think part of it is asking, maybe get a whole long list of those opportunities and see what comes back, and then from a selection criteria, I don't think it's, maybe it is all three to solve one problem. But it's scientific methods, it's learning and then implementing and figuring out maybe through some of these in-depth conversations in this complex corridor, wow, these two or three things really open up lots of doors, because we're not the business and landowners. And then I think there's an opportunity for town council staff to implement that policy. So ultimately, it's not to help those three land business owners. I think the real output for the community is to learn from that, to see what we can do collectively. And it also becomes a catalyst.
Yeah.
I have some questions. To me, it seems like this whole process is kind of trying to get to the same point that we want to involve all the homeowners or all the property owners in, versus just picking a few. If I was just assuming on West River Street, there is a couple developments that are like ready to jump and ready to move, which will probably most likely get selected because they have the funding or they're ready to do that. But we're in an economy where not a lot of new development is happening. Everybody's kind of like waiting for, the next upturn, And so I just wonder how effective this is actually going to be if we can just kind of instead not like completely lay it aside, but kind of like include everybody, all the homeowners and all the business owners in this process. But also I had a question, because I think it ultimately boils down for the property owners to money for development. And so, like, if you can lessen the cost of development, like, you're going to encourage that development. And we're already going to be building the standards for what they can put on their properties, which hopefully benefits them. So is it really going to help with 3 months down the road when we've already said, like, you can do this, this, and this? Is that going to really help us at that point, kind of tie those together and make a change at that point? And then my other question was, like, how does the regulatory relief or permit streamlining, has the town ever implemented something like that? And how would that look? Because that is, honestly, in the town of Truckee, the town has a really bad reputation for just being really hard to build in. And if that can be streamlined, which I think is a great idea, how does that work in practicality? Like, how do you make everybody else in town do all these things, and then you say, okay, West River Street, you don't have to do them?
So that's the crux that we went round and round of how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So the theory of change is start small. It's an elephant. Let's take a couple bites. Yeah. And to try to identify how do you lower the cost for development? How do you make it more streamlined from a planning, zoning? But when you take it in the aggregate, it's too hard to solve. I don't know that it's solvable, and we are using soft language because there's so many stakeholders in this room that owe a piece of that have potential profit, that it's in their job jar to do these certain things for the town. It's somebody else's job to do these other things for the town. So we're got this huge, all these circles trying to that Venn diagram of where's the space where we can maneuver to get everyone in a conversation that's manageable enough. And that's where we came up with RFI, those that are willing, Catalyst Site 3, and we can have all the stakeholders and with maybe enough capacity at a small scale do discovery to all the things you're talking about.
So, Tim, to your point about money, like development costing money, and that's one piece. A lot of, speaking from experience, that money goes to changing goalposts and pounds of flesh. And I think those are both can be addressed here, and that takes the cost of development down for more people to approach. I mean, there's a lot of time and money for a development that goes into things that could easily be perceived as a waste of time, and time is money. And I know, speaking from experience, some things that we've tried in the past, we finally had to kill because we couldn't afford to keep moving with goalposts, and there was too many pounds of flesh being asked for.
Right.
I had an interesting conversation with Aaron a couple of weeks ago about some of these things that property owners should be concerned with. Jack Guzman came, and one of the first things he said was streetscape and infrastructure. And clearly, that is going to be a huge issue. But there are ways to deal with that for property owners and for the district itself, and that is, I've always hoped that redevelopment had lasted, but now Aaron tells me there is something called redevelopment light, which communities can put in place, and an increment of the tax dollars generated from the new project goes into that, which you can bond against, and that money can be used for the infrastructure, so that that isn't falling directly on the shoulders of the property owner as they move forward, because that is going to come up. That's one of the costs of implementing a new project. So there are options potentially for resolving those issues as we move along here. So I think it sounds to me like we're looking for three interested parties to start a discussion and tell us what they're thinking, so that we know where to move. How do we deal with this? I mean, Jack Guzman was an incredible source the day he came and spoke to us about his concerns. So if we get three people we could work with, I think it's pretty exciting.
Two of the challenges in drafting this RFI go to the points you raised, Tim, in that how do we draft something that any of the property owners can respond to, whether they already have a sophisticated plan for development or nothing, just an idea, and how do we address the businesses that are on those properties? I mean, we don't throw them out with the bathwater. So how do we address that? So those are goals.
Right.
To address business owners and property owners that don't have a sophisticated plan as others.
So we've already started that, Tim, don't you think, with our sending Aaron out to outreach to
Yeah,
all
I mean, I
of
think
the
that's,
property owners?
to me, it seems like the process has started, to me, it seems almost a little bit of a distraction versus like dealing with all property owners. Because I think a lot of them have, I mean, there's a lot of opinions. You're never gonna get, even the 3 property owners you pick, you're gonna get such a wide variety of opinions, you know, and like, how do you deal with that? Like, sometimes you just gotta have the master plan but make it benefit them financially. Like, I think if that property owner doesn't wanna do something, they sell it and somebody else does something with it.
Or they do nothing.
Which is what they've been doing.
Right.
Yeah, they do nothing.
Hey, I'm gonna try and keep moving. If there's any more questions?
Kristen was gonna say something. Weren't you looked like you were gonna say something?
I'm trying to keep my mouth shut, but I would say that in the interviews, the majority of the property owners do not want to do it. They
Right.
have a very safe form of cash flow. And
Right.
so the idea is very much what Stephanie said, is like, okay, fine. It's your private property, that is your right, but there are people that wanna do something, so understand what and then try to work with them on actually getting it done, so that there's sort of a proof of concept. But most property owners are perfectly happy with where they are.
Oh, Jason?
Sharon, sorry.
Yes.
I just want to reiterate what Jan and Kristen just said, actually, which is that it's not necessarily looking for like shovel-ready projects.
Yeah.
It could be just the property owner who says, I'm open to change. I have no idea what the change could be. And that's a great answer, actually. Just to, maybe that property owner owns a plot of land that is right on the land that, the environmental team had identified as a major site for some needs or need changes, right? So that's the idea, is it's not necessarily just like looking for shovel-ready projects. And then, it's like what Kristen just said, is the reason we came up with this is because actually most property owners are not open to change, or at least right now. Whereas this idea is, as Jeff was saying, the theory of change here is that, groups of people start seeing a little bit, change there down the street, something happened down on the other side of the street, maybe I could change too. And that's sort of the idea of change here is get the ball rolling on one or two or three projects and then see what happens.
Let me just add a little bit more detail. What Jason said, that a lot of them were at one point had been willing to change, but it's so difficult. It's now very comfortable just to do what I'm doing right now.
Right.
That's everywhere in Truckee.
Well,
I'm gonna,
Can I say something?
yes, absolutely.
There is a piece of property on the river that's undeveloped, that is for sale, that nobody's made a play on. It's right where you guys have a bridge and you want to come across to the property. Why not? Why hasn't somebody brought that up?
The historic homes, the cottages, what do you?
No? Edgar's property.
Setbacks.
It's where you guys have slated for a bridge on there. It's for sale. Don't we have like, I mean, I was just looking at all these numbers, 8 million, 8 million, 7 million, 22 million. I brought
there a
it up
question
twice
there?
and nobody has done anything. So I'm just bringing that up. There is stuff on the river that we have the opportunity.
And I think we have an opportunity here to flesh out an idea for that property if somebody wants to, if he wants to fill out the application.
No,
I
I'm
think
just saying,
that's-
I'm just bringing it up because another friend of mine has some property down the river, a lot of it now. And the county wants a pound of flesh, and the Trust for Public Lands had the opportunity to get it and never did it. And now they want the public to be able to use private property. So I'm just bringing that up because that's like in my brain right now.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'm gonna open for public comment. Please keep it to 3 minutes because we're running really late.
So I think that your interviews and finding landowners that don't want to do anything is only because of the historical, overburdening, completely bankrupting system that exists to get started, okay? I have a friend that was in Santa Barbara. He decided that he wanted to add to his garage. He wanted to have a garage that was inside, whatever. And he was so crippled by the regulatory agencies, $250,000 got him a CD of his plans and approval. Not one stick is in the ground. This was just getting past you guys, all right? And he died. He spent his $250,000, $250,000 to get started. So if people are sitting here going, I don't really want to go through that risk. I'm kind of happy the way it is. We're happy the way it is because it is so astronomically difficult to put up the first pole. That's why. I think you guys are imagining the idea that, hey, I like my dirty little piece of property that I rent to outside storage, and that's fine with me. And the next thing, I had a tenant. $3,000 a month, moved into the space, outside use, been used for outside use for decades. Somebody made a phone call, sent down enforcement, threw them off. I lost $3,000 a month forever now because, non-conforming, illegal non-conforming use. So when people toss that out and say, it'll be okay, we're gonna rezone all your stuff, and it's illegal, legal non-conforming, it doesn't work. It can bite the property owner tremendously, and I've seen it multiple times. So there's a lot of things going on here, and I think the biggest thing of making it possible for people to do projects is your problem. You were talking about everyone has a hand in it. They want to get a piece of something because it's in their job description to extract this out of people that want to do a project. You guys, it's all in your hands. The property owners are sitting here going, that's too high of a bar. I can't handle it, so I am just going to take what I've got, lose a bunch of clients that you guys take away because illegal non-conforming, you can't have it, you can't rent to that guy, you can't do this, and we're like, okay, it's too much. Okay, it's just too much. That's why we're going, this is easier than going through that. And so the people that are satisfied aren't really that I don't want to do anything. It's I don't see any possibility of actually succeeding.
Thank you. Other public comment?
I really like the idea that you have about the RFI on 2 or 3 properties to start small. However, after watching the presentation about access points and about particular physical attributes that certain parts of the river have, that I would think that before you go out with an RFI, you would have some clearly defined criteria for those access points and where they're going to be and how they're going to look. Because if you start having 3 people that are clearly most likely disjointed, they're not right next to each other, and there's no continuity with what they may be doing. And as a developer, I would always like to see a little bit of direction toward what you want. What type of uses, what type of buildings, what type of architecture, and all these things to get them interested. And also, in adhering to all the recommendations we're hearing about the environment, some of those things define.
Thank you. Other public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Additional discussion here. What I'd like to ask Jeff is that you make a motion. I would also ask that anyone who's on the committee who intends to put forth an RFI recuse themselves from the vote, and then we'll call for a vote on this item. Okay. Unless there's.
So I'd like to make a motion to propose an RFI with a selection framework with some criteria. It's simple. I guess, not sure how to word the motion, whether I need to say that it goes to town, no.
You're making a motion.
That's no good.
Recommend to the council.
Page.
Where is it? I don't like that. Wrong glasses. Okay.
Just say it.
Oh, right there, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I make a recommendation to develop equitable and relatively simple RFI to select 3 property owners to work in partnership with River Revitalization Steering Committee, representatives and consultants on initial catalyst planning projects. Economic Vitality Action Team to take the lead on developing RFI, making selection recommendations to the full R2SC.
Well, could you just read the last phrase part? What's gonna come with R2SC? Can you read that part?
The Economic Vitality Action Team to take the lead on developing RFI and making selection recommendations, not the selection recommendations to the full R2SC.
And I would request an amendment that the RFI come back to this committee prior to the selection recommendation.
Okay.
As the only amendment.
So RFI back to R2SC.
Yes.
And I would amend that with some selection criteria framework ahead of time.
Great.
So it does not look like it's arbitrary and capricious,
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah, very good.
I'll second it with that amendment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All those in favor?
Do you need to do a roll
Actually,
call? Yeah.
I probably either need to, roll call vote. Roll call vote.
Or you could do ayes and nays and
On the
abstentions.
committee, and those who will recuse, please recuse during the roll call, if you intend to
Not on the action
apply.
team, on the whole committee. Okay.
The committee.
Chair Joan Jones.
Aye.
Jan Holland.
Abstain.
Alicia Barr.
Abstain.
Travis Kribble.
Aye.
Tim Rupert.
Abstain.
Corey Caldwell.
Recuse.
You know, I better abstain, sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't quite understand that.
Do we have to have a quorum?
Yep.
To be joined?
But abstentions don't count in our
Are
quorum?
we gonna have enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jessica Penman.
Aye.
Steph Olivieri.
Aye.
Brian Wright.
No question, as a potential receiving site entity, can we be directly involved or indirectly involved in this? Should I abstain on
didn't think that RFIs would be for property owners.
Aye.
Jeff Manosco,
Aye.
Lisa Wallace,
Aye.
Rolf Godon,
Aye.
Lindsay Romack,
Aye.
Jan Zaborski, did you
Aye.
hear? Jan Zaborski.
9-5.
Great. Motion passes. Thank you guys very much, and thanks for the good work of both committees. I really would commend you for a lot of hard work and bringing your reports back. The next item we have is the we're going to move into the allowed uses of downtown mixed-use zoning districts. There's a lot here, so we won't get through this all tonight, but we'll get a little bit going on it.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think the conversation that's had, there's some, I think, goalposts for this action committee, or for this hearing committee as well, with the RFI moving forward, that there's some questions about what we want the land use to be. Are there elements in terms of where we want access and public connectivity pieces that this group wants to answer while that the RFI process is in motion. So we're just gonna start today. I think we will get through sort of just the framework, but the questions as we're presenting this information really is about, you know, in terms of mixed use designation, because that's the conversation that came up with this committee, in terms of being able to provide flexibility of use. What does that actually mean in terms of allowed uses? So we wanted to go through and we just describe what allowed uses are currently allowed in the mixed use zoning district for the downtown mixed use, just so we can set the level playing field, and then see if there are uses that we don't think should be allowed in a future river, West River Street, East River Street, mixed use zoning district, or are there uses that do need to be allowed, don't be allowed? So we're just gonna set the framework today, and I think next month we'll dive into it a bit more in detail. So just as a primer, there's two different terms that you hear about. You hear land use and you hear zoning. Land use is what you see in the general plan. Land use is a broad vision. Some of the terms are the same. You'll hear residential in both. But land use, when you hear it in or that title, a use, when you hear it in land use, it really is a general idea for the types of uses, the intensity of uses, how land could be used, where it could be used. It's high level and visionary, and it offers guidance, but it's also flexible. The zoning district that accompanies the land use designation sets the more specific rules related to what is actually allowed, and that's the regulatory tool that the town and other cities use in terms of allowing what's permitted. So it governs what's permitted on the specific parcel of land within the broader framework of a land use designation. It's enforceable, and it controls setbacks, it controls heights of buildings, density, parking requirements, and a lot of other things are associated with your zoning district. Next slide. So again, we'll look at this in the enlarged version as well, but corridor-wide, you can see there's a suite of different zoning districts identified throughout our corridor, ranging from, you can see the legend and the lower right, ranging from downtown single-family residential. The 4 identifies the density associated with residential, to mixed use, to commercial, general commercial, public, downtown manufacturing, rail yard, and open space. Those are the current zoning districts that are identified within the corridor. If we look at land use on the next slide, these are the land use designations that are identified in the 2040 general plan. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, because we'll see some differences, because the land use designations that were identified in the 2040 general plan, not all of those have carried through in terms of zoning district changes for the corridor, in particular the West River Street area. So this is the current zoning in the western portion of the corridor. Purple is the downtown manufacturing. You can see the crosshatched area, which is a downtown mixed use. some residential, both high-density residential, low-density, single-family residential, and then also general commercial. If you contrast that to the next slide on the 2040 general plan land use designations, you can see a general vision, because again, the land use is high level. It's thinking about the broad vision for an area. It's identifying this area as switching to riverfront mixed use, which is that cross-hatched area. So the majority of the parcels would switch over. Land use designation wise, again, the zoning has not been updated to reflect this currently, but that's part of this committee's charge really, is to understand, what would that include? What would riverfront mixed use actually include as zoning designations come through? Next slide. So if we move to the central portion of the corridor, again, this is the existing zoning identified for this area. This area is also in what's called the downtown master plan area as well, and that has another overlay of zoning regulatory considerations for properties. But you can see a mix of both downtown commercial, downtown mixed use, and then also medium density residential in this area. And if you look at that on the next slide, contrasting the same area with the 2040 general plan land use designations, again, similar land uses that align generally with the zoning designations, where you have the downtown mixed use areas and commercial, and then the residential maintaining. So this area is the 2040 general plan land use designations are a bit more in alignment with the current zoning designations, but there's some small discrepancies. Let me get through the rest of it, and then we'll come back. I'm sure there'll be more than one question. So the next slide, this is the downtown plan. So you can see, again, there's just another overlay in terms of areas within the downtown plan area in terms of certain specific guidelines and requirements that they're looking to achieve there. If we continue on to the eastern portion of the corridor, this area is zoned primarily for residential with different densities. And again, this is the existing zoning where you have medium density residential with a density of 14, and that's 14 dwelling units per acre. So these are small parcels, so if you actually took the area of each of those parcels and divided it in terms of how many dwelling units there is per acre, they're about correct in terms of parcel size between the medium density and the high density designations, but there are some uses in the middle that are more of the construction yard types of uses that are in the residential zoning. And if you look at that contrasted with the general plan land use designations, again, you can see some consistency there between the current zoning for this area and then also the land use designations with residential and different densities. I'm gonna pause there for questions. We do have a list, but the next series of slides is really diving into mixed use designations, and again, what uses are allowed in that mixed use zoning district for downtown mixed use zoning. And you might not be, a use might be a trailhead, or might be an open space piece. It's a different type of use, but it still might be allowed in a zoning district that doesn't have that same name, so it can get strange sometimes. But general questions first on just the baselining of
Well, I just wanted to make a comment that I think that the general plan had specifically identified this zone where it's high-density housing for basically the town council or some committee or the town to review that as whether or not that's appropriate, right? On the East River, so that brown area. And I think the other, it's kind of more of a question, but those of us that are in the quote-unquote rezoned area according to the general plan are still really in limbo or waiting.
Correct.
For implementation of that general plan, and I'm assuming that's because we're waiting on what this committee's going to decide what to do there. Is that accurate?
Yes, I'm waiting for the feedback from the committee. That's why I think we thought if we go through the PMU uses, that would help define that. It may end up being, I think this is good, you may want to do more of the business innovation, but we want to start narrowing that down to steps point to have, you're not in limbo.
Yes, because I think that's the biggest piece. You can see the West River Street area where there's different zoning in place right now. The land use vision is that changes, and that's the charge of this. Other, Travis, you have a question?
I'm looking at this, it says public facility. What is meant? I think it's the one prior on page 28.
It's where the
So
regional
I see
park
public-
is.
Huh?
It's the regional park land.
No.
The blue section?
Is it on
It's on the one prior.
Slide 28,
Yeah, 28.
existing zoning central area, right there.
It says public facility.
It's a
What's
parking lot.
public-
That's parking lot. That's the parking lot.
That's where our staging area is.
Oh, well, no, I get that, but then the one above that, there's, the blue just says public. On the little
This
legend
one?
there, right here, see where it says public, so that's blue, and this one says public facility.
Oh,
So I understand.
back one more slide.
It might be because that's the that's the nuance between
I'm just
a
trying to get a
land.
I'm like,
Yeah, so that's the difference between a land use.
a facility is not a parking lot, that's
So
what I'm
a land, and that's the difference between land use designation, those terms, the names that are used for land use designations are often very similar to the terms used for zoning, but are just subtly different. Generally, it means the same thing.
So this is
And
a land use?
This is the land use map, they described it just as public, and in the zoning district, it's, the term is public facility, although they're fairly similar.
Travis, the could get updated when we update the zoning. We could change it if we wanted to and just call it public. So I wouldn't make it too much of the fact that it says
Yeah, I'm just
facility.
trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Public facility.
It's just an original term that the town adopted from Nevada County.
Any other baseline questions? Do you want me to go through the list? or do you-
Yeah, let's,
So we'll walk through this list, but, and then.
that
just
gives people
absorb
something to
it.
think about
Yeah.
for a whole month.
Excellent.
So the zone, the allowed uses, so the development code has a table that has your zoning districts and then all of the uses identified that are either allowed by some type of permit. So there is a permitted use or it's a conditional, permitted with a conditional use, so it has to go through a few more steps in terms of the process for approval, or it has a minor use permit, or it might be not permitted. What's listed here in this chart is not comprehensive of every single use on that table, but what we have talked about in this group. But it does list all the permitted uses of all the different types of categories of potential uses for the downtown mixed-use zoning. Again, this is our starting point to see, are there things that are here? Is this, comprehensive? Are there things that, or should we be thinking of different elements to include? So within the category of agriculture, resource, open space uses, the allowed uses or permittable uses within the downtown mixed use zoning are those in green, so nature reserves and trails. And trailhead and recreation area parking are not currently permitted in the downtown mixed use zoning. So that might be one that we want to reconsider, because that's one that has come up in this discussion.
We just did it.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, so you'll change the downtown mixed-use zoning to allow trailheads? Is that the plan?
That's the question to this group, not the
Oh.
downtown mixed-use zoning, but the riverfront mixed-use zoning, or
Right.
zoning within this, our project area.
So
They're-
instead of changing a portion of the zoning that we're rezoning, you would just change the whole mixed-use plan?
Yeah, if you go back just a couple of slides to the West River Street, the land, general land, so this area that's crosshatched
Right.
is per the land use per the 2040 general
Right.
plan. So it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have zoning.
No,
because it's
I
not
understand
zoning
that.
district. So
I
we're
was just
trying-
wanted clarification on if there was zoning, if we would just change a little zoning section, or if you're trying to change the definition of mixed use.
We would want, yeah, we're trying to say what should be allowed. If we're doing mixed use, if we
Right.
all agree that mixed use is appropriate for West River Street and other portions of the corridor, are there other uses that we would want allowed? Not spot zoning, not per parcel, but over the sweep of that area, that would be riverfront mixed use.
Because that changes it for all of mixed use, not
All
just
of
West
the,
River Street.
all of just this riverfront mixed use.
So it'd be a
just
new
the river.
zoning
Oh,
category.
okay.
We
Okay,
could also
that was my
we could
question.
also consider it for downtown mixed use use as well, but we'd want to not do it just for one area.
Do you have the guiding language that was brought in? I know it's somewhat vague, but there's language from the 2040 general plan that some of us agonized over. You know.
I toyed with putting that in, but thought I wouldn't for this meeting, but I can bring that in terms of what the riverfront area, there's a few pages about that, we can include it in the next package.
Yeah.
What was envisioned for this area?
There was a lot of time that went into that.
I bet.
I had a question about, since we're gonna be thinking about it for a month. On page 18, the outdoor sales and displays of merchandise, large and small and medium, outdoor storage of merchandise. Wasn't too clear what that related to. What type of a
It can
business?
be, probably Mountain Home Center would be one business that you might, that has outdoor displays of goods.
Mm-hmm.
Another could be, I'm looking at Danielle. Well, there, like an outdoor, you could have an RV park, RV lot, you know, like a car dealer has outdoor displays. I know that's always been.
Hopefully not.
I know. Well, it's always been one that we like have talked about in planning that like, is there a place in this town for one? No, there's not.
Probably a good thing.
Well, I mean, we
I don't know.
have, we have a spot for bikes for them to sell motorized bicycles, so.
Yeah.
And they could,
There's a
they can
difference between a
display
bike and a
the
Tesla.
outside.
Motorized.
Size.
I mean, seriously.
Good question.
I mean,
It's a question, but,
Okay, so that's basically what it's referring to.
yeah, things that sit outside.
Yeah.
It's
That are
accessory
considered.
to a primary use.
But it has to be accessory
It
to
has to be
primary use.
accessory.
Does that say that here?
No, it's probably somewhere. It's in the definition, yeah.
Okay, good.
There was a
I
car
just
lot prior
envisioned
to
it to
the
be
town's
just outside.
existence.
What was that?
I mean, there was a car lot
In Gateway.
prior to the town in Gateway. Pocket auto sales?
Let's keep going through since we only have, well, generally.
We're already
have
over time.
I think we're out of time.
I think generally,
But,
if you look
so-
through, the area, the ones in sort of the orange are the highlighted ones that either have come up or are an existing use in the river corridor that are not permitted. And then really identifies the other uses that currently are permitted within that zoning district.
I asked, make a request.
Yes.
And I don't, and this goes out to this group as a homework assignment, that you put out this list, and we can check either yes, no, or additional questions, for inclusion in that. And then at the next meeting, we could actually have a compilation of those results, and
I'll just do a survey.
do a survey.
Yeah.
And then we can actually discuss.
It'll be
that.
lengthy.
So.
But I think that'll make the
It'll
a lot
make it
more
a lot
productive.
Yeah,
if I-
that's what
yeah.
I'm hoping.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to wait a whole month to think about it.
And but if there is information as you go through, like would like more information about a
Yeah.
type of use, note it, I'll check it regularly and we can disperse information back out. Other general questions about the next? If not, I will, before you turn it on over to the public comment, I will just also say thank you to our action teams, here and the public for all the work you guys have done. A ton of work over the summer, so thank you for the extra meetings.
Any other questions on this at this time? Seeing none, I'll open for public comment.
I guess just a quick one. There's a section in here that was residential 4. Okay, now it's all green open space. So that clearly has a substantial impact on the property's value. What is the idea or the plan of compensation for doing that parcel?
I don't know the answer to that, but we'll take that as a
It ought to
question
be
for the.
pretty important to some.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we will move on to subcommittee updates. Stephanie,
Which one, you wanna do the?
receiver sites.
Receiver sites, oh, okay.
Your site
My
subcommittee,
subcommittee,
your
okay.
subcommittee.
We had a good meeting recently, and we were very fortunate to have Sarah Mancuso come and educate us a bit on receiver sites.
For those who don't know, can you give us context?
Oh, Sarah Mancuso with Pioneer Center, I guess you call your business Pioneer Center? Yeah. And we recognize that he's very knowledgeable about the industrial development here. He's been on the ground floor, and he's done a lot of development for businesses that have relocated or located in industrial. And he's got a beautiful complex, and we thought he would be a good person to talk to about relocation. And I would kind of ask Ciro to give us a quick highlight of what he mentioned to us as a possibility. Would that be appropriate now, or would it be?
Sure.
In a nutshell, Ciro, your recommendation for increasing industrial use, land use.
Well, I think the essence of most of what I said was that in order to, a first step for asking people that have uses in the West River area to have a place where they can go. Because there are a lot of thriving businesses there, and to ask the landlords, put these people out of business, they really need to have a place to go, because from what I see in the mixed use zoning and land use, that most of the businesses that are currently there really won't fit into that new matrix. So I was just having some suggestions about not only location for those businesses, but also design of those businesses. Design in such a way that they can have shops or manufacturing facilities or anything that occurs currently in the West River corridor. And one of the major components of that is outdoor storage. And that's something that nobody really wants to see, as we've defined well in the general plan. And that's one of our challenges with Pioneer Commerce Center. We have about 235,000 square feet of mixed-use industrial uses. And one of our biggest challenges with relocating people, and we've had this going on for 20-odd years, from the West River corridor, was accommodating for outdoor spaces, outdoor storage, outdoor spaces. A company like Travis has, where they have a lot of tires and a lot of vehicles that are coming in and out. There's got to be a place for those. And most people, feels like the general consciousness around Truckee is they don't want to see it. That's one of the biggest problems, issues that we have is conflict. One person has a lot of outdoor things, other people don't. People that don't want to see the other guy's stuff, whether it's heavy equipment for snow removal or excavation, or if it's generally just having some space to park extra vehicles, like most plumbing contractors or any other type of contractors up here usually have vehicles that have to be parked overnight, and that becomes a problem, especially in the winter snow. So I think identifying good places where facilities like this can be built so that you have these things out of sight from the general public is going to take some good planning.
Yes. Thank you, Sarah. So I think working with Sarah with our committee, we can start honing in on some presentations to you of alternative sites for those who wish to relocate.
Yeah, I would also add that the agencies that were present really did provide some great opportunities,
Right.
and I appreciate them.
And some clarifications of things that can and cannot happen. Like, we have some ideas that we would love to be realize that it's just not gonna happen. It was a great meeting.
Yeah.
None of us know how to read maps.
Any public comment on that item? Seeing none, I'm gonna close public comment. Any other committee member updates? Any member of the committee wish to make any updates? Yes,
I always have a chamber update.
that's good.
We have our candidate forums for the contested elections in the region tomorrow, and Thursday. Tomorrow is the hospital district and the airport district, 5:30 to 8, and then on Thursday is youth are actually presenting pros and cons on Measure E, which is the essential services sales tax, and then it will be the sanitary district as well as the PUD. So, open to the public. They'll also be on channel 118 and live streamed as well, and recorded.
Where?
It's here, in this room. Yes, we spend a lot of time in this room.
Home away from home.
Yep.
Thank you very much. You had a future agenda item? Let's skip that.
We have our future agenda.
Great. With that, I will move to adjourn the meeting till November 5th at 5:15 in this.
Which
Thank
is
you.
election day, so make sure you vote
Yeah.
or turn in your ballot before coming to the meeting.
They'll be